Hey there, it's Kat and this is Brews and Reviews. In today's video, I'm going to give you guys my last wrap up of 2021. So these are all the books that I read in December, and if you happen to have watched any of the vlogs that I did for the Hemisphere Christmas games, I know they're not everybody's cup of tea, but if you did watch them, then you probably know all of the books that I'm going to talk about. But if you didn't watch them, then here's a quick wrap up of the 19 books that I read throughout December. So I had a really productive month, and I do credit the Hemisphere Christmas games for that. So let's get straight into this. The first book that I read in December was Nightblade by Ryan Kerr. This is an adult high fantasy novel that follows 3 perspective characters from when they were children to when they are sort of young adults becoming adults, and they're all in very different situations. So there is a little boy who loses his family and then sort of gets adopted by a Nightblade who is sort of a magical assassin that is supposed to not exist anymore. And then you have another girl, Moriko, who is taken into this kind of church to be trained to use her gifts, and she's slightly different from the other people that were in the church. Not trying to give any spoilers. And then you also have Takako, who is essentially sold into a brothel, and she interweaves with the other storylines. She's quite an interesting character, and I liked all of the perspective characters. I will say that it gets super dark at times, like, thanks for the darkness there, love that. The magic system was also really interesting. I'm definitely intrigued to read more, especially after where this one ended, because I feel like this kind of wrapped up childhood, and the next one will be people stepping into what is actually happening in the world, and I feel like that could be very interesting. So next up I read Christmas Every Day by Beth Moran, and I believe in my TBR video for this I said that I thought this was going to be like Groundhog Day but at Christmas, and I was just the most wrong. So this was a contemporary romance, kind of chick lit type book, and I don't usually read those, but it turns out that I did a lot this month because that seems to be a genre that mixes very well with Christmas books and things that are set in the snow. So not my usual type of thing that I read, but we just roll with it, okay? The main character in this moves to a random cottage that was owned by her grandmother, I think, before she died, and it's like dilapidated, it's like falling down, and she meets her neighbour who's grumpy, and they sort of fight with each other, but they don't. And then she joins a book club that's not really a book club at all. She just meets some people, and then it's romantic, sort of. And the Christmas Every Day thing comes into it in the sense that loving you is like Christmas every day, and yes, I did just want to vomit in my mouth a little bit then, but I refrained. To be fair, it is something that the characters mock, because it isn't the main characters that say that. A little bit too cheesy for me there. I did end up liking it. I give it 3 out of 5 stars because it was just, you know, okay. I liked the side characters and some of the other things that were happening. It's kind of like the type of romantic comedy film that I like to watch, but I'm not sure I would necessarily pick this sort of book up again, aside from during this month, which you will see a lot of them. In the future, probably going to read less of that type of book, so I won't repeat that again. So next up I read a book that was definitely more me and more along the lines of the things that I've been reading recently, and that is the On Honeymooners by Christina Lauren. And this is an enemies to lovers, fake dating, well, kind of fake married. It's a really good book. I really enjoyed it a lot. The premise of this book is that the maid of honor and the best man at a wedding are the only two that don't eat this discounted buffet that is questionable food, and everybody else gets ridiculously sick, and the honeymoon is non-refundable, so the 2 main characters end up going on this honeymoon because somebody should, and then like romance and fun and bickering, and you know, it was all a good time up until the end, where the questionable part of this book happened for me. The reason that I gave it 4 stars instead of 5 stars, because it was really close to me up until the end, because the main male character did something that just made me want to put him in the bin, because I was like, why did you go and ruin it? Why did you do that very particular thing that I found so offensive? And I'm not going to say what it is, because it is obviously a major spoiler for quite a few things that happen in the book, but he made a decision, acted in a certain way, and I was like, well, that's you done then, in my eyes at least. If we'd have removed that reaction to the thing that happens at the end of the book, then he would have been okay, but 4 out of 5 stars. It was an enjoyable book, but I had problems with the end bit. Next up I read What I Like About Me by Jenna GM, and this was one of the group books for the Hemisphere Christmas games. It's a book set at Christmas in Australia, so it's like a beach Christmas and involves a sort of Christmas pageant, and the main character is fat and she decides to take part in this pageant, and there's a lot of teen romance angst and family angst and just different things that are happening there. I did enjoy the discussion around fatness and friendship and family and actually communicating with each other, because, you know, I love communication, and although miscommunication does happen in this book and I wish it didn't, I do like the fact that we got to talk about, yeah, we probably should communicate, that would be good, but you know, that's a side point. I wasn't sure about the book at first, but I did end up really enjoying it, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I'm going to talk about the next 3 books altogether because they're part of the same series, and I buddy read all 3 of these books with Kayla from Crack Into a Good Book. So that is The Mistake, The Score, and The Goal by Elle Kennedy. So this is books 2, 3, and 4, and they all follow different members of the hockey boys, as I like to call them, and the people that they become relationshiped, the people they date. So The Mistake started off a little bit dodgy for me. I wasn't sure about it, I wasn't sure about Logan. I feel like this is a thing with these books, is that I start off not loving the guy characters and then end up really liking them as I go. And I don't mind that because I feel like growth is a good thing. This one actually made me smile quite a lot and I just got really into it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The Score was actually the book that surprised me the most in this series because it featured the guy that I liked the least, who was kind of just a player, and previous interactions with him had been kind of like, oh meh, oh no, oh no. But this book was really good. I really liked how free everyone was with their sexual expression, and they just did stuff and they were very open about it and communicating about things, and it was great. Up until a thing that happened near the end and I was like, no, why is that happening? It made me really sad. This is definitely the book with the most sexy times that happens in it, and it was just a good time. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and it's the only one in the series I gave 5 out of 5 stars. Now let's move on to The Goal, which is the 4th book, and I hated it. I hated it so much I gave it 1 out of 5 stars. I was so surprised because I thought, no. Now here's the thing, right? The 3rd book ends with a reveal of the trope that's going to happen in the 4th book. And it is the pregnancy trope. I'm not spoiling anything for this book because you know it happens before, and the characters in this one are just really not related to the other books. This is like a tag-on book. Almost like the author was like, I've got ideas for these first 3, and then she's like, oh yeah, I need to do something for this last guy. I don't know, let's make him have a baby. He's just not even barely in any of the other books, so it was just really just the worst. I didn't like either of the characters, and it really divorced itself from romance, because it was like, oh, we start off with this like romance thing, and then they were like, oh, we're pregnant, and then it only became focused on babies and going, oh, I don't know if I want to be in a relationship, don't push me, and he's like, I'm not, I've barely even spoken to you for like 3 months, and she's like, oh, pressure, don't push me, I'm having a baby, and he's like, she's having a baby, and I just really hated it. It was so bad. I did not enjoy it at all. Maybe this is just me really hating on the pregnancy trope, but I just really did not enjoy this book. I wish I could like wipe it free of my brain, but it won't go. I hate it. It was bad. The next book I picked up was Unwind by Neil Shusterman. This is the start of a dystopian series, and is set in a world where people who were pro-life and pro-choice had a big war, and they basically decided that, okay, we can't agree, but we have mastered genetic transplants now, so why don't we say that you have up until a child is 18 to be able to unwind them, which means that they sort of get taken apart and all of their organs and matter gets given to other people in transplants and stuff. Like, you can have a brain transplant, so like little bits of brain go to loads of different people, and it's weird, and it's super fucked up when you actually think about it. It was really dark and twisted, and the fact that you're in the heads of these kids that are set to be unwound as they try and escape what has been ordained for them, it's just, it was a lot. I wasn't quite expecting it to be that dark for like a YA dystopian, but it was. Especially as at one point in this book you're actually reading from the perspective of a person who is being unwound. Anyway, I really did enjoy this book, and I'm really glad that I finally picked it up. I feel like Neil Shusterman just comes up with really twisted, fucked up things, and I just quite like them, so yeah. So next up I read Jade City by Fonda Lee, and I actually remembered the name of it this time because throughout the month I kept calling it Jade War, and that's the sequel not the first book in the series. I think I'm really behind the times on finally picking this one up, but I'm really glad that I did. It's set in an Asian-inspired fantasy world following kind of mafia-type gang-related activities that happen there. In this particular country, there are certain people who can infuse jade into themselves and use it to give themselves specific powers. And it's about who controls different things in the city. And you follow this one family as they are sort of going through a hard time, shall we say. I don't want to spoil anything, but I was really surprised by how much I like this book. I don't really like gang-related things, and I think it's because I have this weird deep-seated hatred for Peaky Blinders, even though I never actually watched it. And I just don't like watching anything to do with the mafia because it's just kind of boring to me, and I don't know why. It just is in my head, so. Unless it's like a sexy time romance mafia book, I probably will read that, but I don't know why there's a difference there. Anyway, beside the point, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm definitely going to pick up the next one because I got really into it, and I feel like there were real consequences for the things that were happening, and it wasn't just like, oh, these people are invincible, because they're not. Or they're not. So yeah, it was good. The next book I read was Kiss the Girls by James Patterson. This is the second book in the Alex Cross series. Essentially, a group of women have been kidnapped at various points in times, and some of them are turning up dead, and Alex Cross's niece is one of the people who ends up kidnapped. And it's sort of a search to find them. I really enjoyed the mystery and the investigation side of this book. I thought that was really interesting, but I did have a little bit of trouble with the reactions of the women in this book. You get a lot of their perspective, and I'm like, I'm not sure that a human would react to this trauma in this kind of way. I've talked about that quite a lot in other videos I've made. If you want to check out one of the Hemisphere Christmas Games vlogs that I did, where I talk about this book, because I go into a lot of detail about female trauma and just trauma in general, and how I feel like romance in this book was completely unnecessary. So if you want to hear about that, go check out that vlog. Next up I read Dying for Christmas by Tammy Cohen. Now the premise of this book is that a woman has been kidnapped and is being held for the 12 days of Christmas in this random flat in London with a man who is killing her. And this book is a really peculiar one for me because you can kind of split it into two halves, and I'm trying to sort of think how to explain this in my head without spoiling anything, because the thing that splits it in half is a giant twist, and I didn't see it coming. Though there were like some things that felt weird to me beforehand that hinted at the thing that was the twist. I can't go into it without spoiling it, but if you've read this book then you'll know that the book is completely two separate halves, and it becomes very different later on, and I feel like the stuff that happened later on really changed my rating of it, because the things that I had a problem with in the beginning were sort of explained later. It's so hard not to spoil anything for this book. I should just do a spoiler talk on it, really, shouldn't I? But I'm not gonna unless you guys really want me to. So I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars, and it was a book filled with horrible people who did horrible things to each other all the time. The next book I read was The Christmas Escape by Sarah Morgan. Again, a Christmas chick lit that I just decided to pick up. And it was kind of boring. Like, there were some bits that I liked. I did like Alex and the sort of relationship that was blooming there. The problems that I had with this book mostly stemmed from the fact that it was quite repetitive, and I felt like everybody was having the same thoughts over and over again. It was like, yes, that is the major problem that you are having right now, but I don't need to read about it every second page that you are in this book in. It became super repetitive, and I just was a bit bored by it. Also, not a lot happens for the first 80 to 100 pages, and I just really wanted it to get to the point, and I was like, can you just get to the place where you need to go? Once they were there, it became a little bit better. I do think that I had a problem because I didn't like one of the main characters. I felt like she made horrible decisions and was kind of a horrible friend, but maybe that's just me because I've known people like that and they sucked as friends. Overall, I give it 3 out of 5 stars. I did have some problems with it, but it was fun and a Christmas read, I guess. But yeah. Next up I read The Six Tales of Christmas by Anne-Marie Ryan. This is a contemporary story in a failing bookshop in a small town, where at Christmas they decide to send out 6 books to people who really need it, and they send them out anonymously, and you sort of follow the stories of these 6 individuals that get given the books and how the books affect what they're doing. There's also the story of the people who own the bookshop, which I didn't like as much, and I honestly struggled to get into the book because of them, because there was a whole lack of communication, and you know I hate that. When it sort of veered off into the stories of the other people, I enjoyed the book a lot more, and by the end of it, it made me tear up, and I got really into it. And I was like, this book made me do such a U-turn. I was really surprised by it, and, you know, a happy surprise at least. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was I Wish It Could Be Christmas Every Day by Millie Johnson. This is another chick-lit-ish kind of contemporary romance book where these 6 people end up in an inn because of a rogue snowstorm that nobody was expecting, and about the relationships that they sort of develop as they're trapped in the inn for Christmas Eve, Christmas Day and Boxing Day. They come in like 3 pairs of 2 and they all have sort of things going on, and I liked it quite a lot, to be honest. It was kind of the perfect Christmas Eve read, and that was when I read it, so it just made me feel all of the feelings, and it didn't do everything that I expected it to do in the sense of predictability. You know, it was just really cute and I really enjoyed it, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Next up we have The Christmas Murder Game by Alexandra Benedict. This is a book that I got given as a Secret Santa present from work, and it was really successful. I really am glad that I read it and I really enjoyed it. So the premise for this book is that a woman has died and her family have come back to the hotel slash house that they grew up in, and they're playing a Christmas game in order to try and find out who can own the deed to the house. And it brings all of these questionable family members together and murder and stuff. Honestly, I got really into it, even if I was a bit too dumb to actually figure out what the clues were. They were very anagram based, and I not so great with the anagrams. It takes me a while to figure them out, and I was just like, but I just want to read it. The main character figured it out straight away for me, so I was like, oh, this is fine. I don't have to expend the brain power on this, even though the author actually did include anagrams of various things, like crime book titles, and also the anagrams for the 12 Days of Christmas songs, you know, like A Partridge in a Pear Tree was just like anagrammed into this book somewhere, but there was a key at the back, so I didn't feel like I missed out on anything because I was too dumb to actually see where the anagrams were, but like, anagrams are hard, man. They're hard. Anyway, this book was good. I didn't get the clues, but I did manage to guess who was doing the things that were happening and why they were doing it. Like, there were some questionable things happening, but I did enjoy this book. It is a closed-in mystery thriller with murder and stuff, and it was just fun. Well, murder and death, but fun. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars anyway. The next book that I picked up was Vicious by Victoria Schwab. This is a book about extraordinaries, also known as EOs, and about 2 guys that decide that they are going to try and become EOs. And then their very questionable lives after the fact, because wow, these are some morally grey people that exist. This book is a very character-focused book that is like, I want revenge on this guy from the perspective of both of the 2 guys. And then they just do bad things. Nobody's nice in this book, but like, it was good. I liked it. 4 out of 5 stars. I'm glad that I read it. I just kind of wish that there was more in the rest of the world. Like, I knew more about the other things that were happening, but also Angry Murder Boys. 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I picked up was Bookish and the Beast by Ashley Poston, and this is the 3rd book in the Once Upon a Con series. It's a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, which is usually my favourite type of retelling, but it was probably my least favourite of the 3 books in this series. And I think that's because it was really simple and it didn't really do anything original with the Beauty and the Beast storyline, whereas the other ones had at least got the convention, the fandom convention aspect to it. This one just didn't, and it was kind of dull. It didn't even go far enough with the things that it did play with, and I didn't really get too invested in either of the main characters either, so it was fine. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It was a very quick read. I'm glad I've read it now, but I probably wouldn't pick that one up for a reread anytime soon. The next book I picked up was Caraval by Stephanie Garber, and I'm so glad that I've read this one because the more I think about it, the more I enjoyed it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I feel like everyone and their mother knows what Caraval's about, but if you don't, it is set in a fantasy world where every year Caraval takes place, and it's like a festival where you don't know what's real and what's not, and you play a game or you watch the game. Things happen and you don't know whether they're real or they're not. That is all I can say without sort of spoiling it, and you follow two sisters, and one of the sisters goes missing in Caraval. And I actually really liked it. It was very twisty, it was very hard to know what was real and what wasn't real, and I really felt for Scarlet, who's the character that you follow throughout most of the book. I did get very frustrated with certain things, and I was really frustrated by Tella, who is her sister, who goes missing. I don't know how I feel about Tella. I've got problems with her, and I feel like if we met each other we wouldn't get along. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and that's all I'm going to say on the matter. And the last book that I read in 2021 was The Miracle on Ebenezer Street by Catherine Doyle. It was a middle grade Christmas Carol retelling. To be honest with you, I kind of just read it to complete a challenge for the Hemisphere Christmas Games. It was one of the group books, and it was the last challenge that I had to complete the board for the 3rd time, so I was like, oh, just read it. It'll be very quick, and you know, even though I know that middle grades aren't really for me, but that's beside the point. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars because it was okay, it just didn't do anything particularly original for me, and I also listened to the audiobook of it, and the narrator was good, except specifically for the elf voice. I hated it because it gave me a massive headache because it was so high-pitched, and I was like, why didn't you choose to do such a high-pitched voice for such a long part of the book? I just had problems with it. It was fine. I give it 3 out of 5 stars, and I feel like if you like middle grade books that are sort of like Christmas cheer about like a 10-year-old who's trying to stop their dad from being a Scrooge, then, you know, you might enjoy it. It just wasn't really for me. So there we have it. Those are all the books that I read in December. If you got to this part in the video, then please leave me a Christmas tree emoji. I know we're in January now, but I don't care, so please leave me a Christmas tree emoji. I would appreciate it. And if you like this video, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!